Hi everyone, welcome to week 3 of our community and organizations class. I hope that things are going well for you so far in the class. I've received some great questions and I'm trying to get back to them in a timely manner, so please let me know if you have any confusion or questions that I can answer. You could post them in the questions forum as well on our Moodle site. So a couple of announcements. Just to let you know, I'm still grading, probably finish up grading today, Monday, week one's forum posts, which I'm really appreciating reading. I'm actually going to post a kind of a highlights document. I cut and pasted some of your most fabulous comments into a document, and I wanted to post that up on our Moodle site so everybody could share your brilliance. Um, just little snippets of things that struck me or that I liked what you said. Um, and so that'll be up on our Moodle site. And I'm going to try to do that from time to time with your forum posts because I really love some of the things that you said, and I want to showcase them. So I hope that you're okay with that. Um, so I'm still grading week 1. I'll be grading week 2 forum posts. There was a lot of forum posts for week 2. I'll be grading those this week. Try and keep on top of those. People have been asking me about the amount of forum posts, and there have been a lot so far in week 1, 2, and 3. There's 2 to 4 discussion forums, and I realize that's more than what you're used to and what's in most of your classes, and I apologize if it's a lot of work. Kind of front-loading things in that way a little bit. We don't have any big assignments due yet, so kind of wanting to discuss a little bit more and use those forums in the beginning of class, and that should wane in the coming weeks when more assignments become due. So I won't overload you all semester, I promise. Um, what else? So this week is week 3, and we're going to be talking about what is community. We're going to be talking about urban and rural communities. We're going to be talking about relational and virtual communities, and a little bit of a basic understanding of community assets. We'll be getting more into understanding community assets next week. So our objectives this week, really quickly, these are on Moodle. Be able to articulate distinctive types of problems as well as solutions in diverse neighborhoods and communities, specifically urban versus rural communities, which we're going to go over today in lecture. Understand and value the history of social life and social networks in the United States. Appreciate and be able to critique the use of virtual communities, the internet, and social networks as a means of modern community, specifically around issue organizing. That's been coming up a lot around the Occupy movements and things like that. So I have a couple of website articles that I want you to check out that are up on our Moodle site this week. Recognize the value of Alinsky's timeless discussion of means and ends with regard to the ethics of organizing. And one of your forum posts will be about that this week. Consider the role of social worker and our relationship to the changing nature of community. One of the questions that I'd like to pose to you is kind of a rhetorical question to think about. I've been thinking about this a lot lately as well. Just with the proliferation of internet organizing, specifically around, the Arab Spring movement, things like that. I'm wondering, what are our place, what's our place, social workers, in the future of online organizing? Are we as professional social workers, are we going to be needed in this realm, in this coming realm in the future? Are we going to be needed to organize and coordinate and lead social movements and campaigns? Or are people going to take the power into their own hands, so to speak, and use the internet to become empowered? And that's our hope, that's our goal, right? That people will do that and use those tools and in their own hands and empower themselves and their own communities. So I'm just wondering, what our role, social workers' role, is going to be in the coming years in that way. So I just wanted you to think about that too. So let's see, without further ado, I'm going to get into the lecture and try not to bore you too much. And some of you have said that you appreciate the lectures. I hope that you do. I hope that they are helpful to you. So here we are in week 3. Let's see if we can get this to work here. Week 3, we're going to talk about rural communities. So I'm just taking a little snippet from this week's chapter 6 in our book, and I'm bringing together one of our readings, some things from the Brueggemann text, and some other things together for this lecture. So we're kind of going to focus just in on the rural communities for this lecture. There's a lot of other things covered in the book for this week. So a little bit about the advanced generalist perspective when we're talking about community work and rural practice. I'd like for you to understand the conceptualization, to be able to conceptualize this social work practice, this advanced generalist perspective, and what we call that really it's a rejection of that dichotomous view of direct versus indirect practice. So we're talking about integrated community-based practice, right? So we want to integrate the direct work and the indirect work that we can do. So no longer are we saying, micro versus macro, and we're trying to figure out how to integrate those. And technically, when we're talking about rural community work, you have to. You have no choice. It's integrated. That's the nature of the work. And so it's pretty, it's kind of cutting edge in that way, which is why I like it. So we're drawing individuals together, obviously, to empower them, to change systems. We're talking about habilitation, not necessarily rehabilitation. So habilitation is strengths-based. Habilitation is providing resources and education to the community, which is the kind of work that we're doing. Community work and rural social work are the same, really. I mean, we can't do rural social work without doing community work. So that's something that we need to understand if we're going to be organizing in a rural community. Excuse me. So a lot of things that sometimes what happens in the rural communities is this process of what we call normalization, which I think all of you probably understand that idea if you've been in social work school for a while now. It's just that, we come to view certain behaviors as just the norm. We don't even think about them. This is just how we operate. This is just how things are here, right? Do you hear that a lot? If you live in a rural community, you probably do. That's just how things are here. That's how we do things. So I guess I invite you to kind of think critically a little bit about that normalization process that happens in rural communities and how we can be a part of, of rocking that boat a little bit. I want you to view the community as a co-worker of the social worker. So we're not doing for people. Again, we're doing with. And I hope you're hearing this from, through all your classes. We're never doing things for people. That's not the goal in social work. We're doing things with people, right? We're empowering them. Community work is everything to do with group work, teamwork, and leadership. A best practice is really to use the case management framework as a perspective for your work. So you're trying to understand the whole person, the systems, kind of systems theory comes into this as well. All the systems that are at play in someone's life. And we'll actually talk a little bit more about this next week when we talk about asset-based community development and all the assets that exist in a community and how we can bring those in to help people. When we're organizing, how do we involve community in everything we do? How do we involve, how do we think about community in all these decisions that we're going to be making through this work? Okay, so this is all from this slide up to slide 15. It's actually all from the book, but I wanted to pull out some of these things so we can talk about them briefly. I'm going to go pretty quickly, but again, this is all in the book, chapter 6. So we're going to talk a little bit about rural communities. and the idea that rural communities have shifting populations right now. So the populations are declining. The population in general are aging. Older people are staying in the communities while younger people are leaving to find work, raise families. So the reproduction rates are falling and the population base is shrinking, right? So that means less economic resources for that community. So if the funding isn't there to support housing and schools and healthcare and transportation, those systems and institutions fail. Many times the rural communities we're working with are chronically poor, generally generationally poor. They're agriculture and forestry dependent, which we know those industries are declining, and um, they're specifically needing a lot of help these days, which we'll talk about at the end of the lecture a little bit of how the federal government is helping those kind of industries right now. So in the rural economy, poverty rates are always higher than the national poverty rate. Um, Agriculture, forestry, energy, and non-energy mining and fishing, they've all experienced a decline, and those are, traditional economies of rural-based communities. Globalization is changing the rural agricultural economy. So we're having that base of, low-skilled manufacturing jobs is no longer what's happening so much and able to drive the economy. So the rural economy today is actually plagued by lots of federal policies that have were framed to support the rural communities, but actually ended up kind of failing those communities, unfortunately. One of them was the 2008 Farm Bill, which was actually a $300 billion proposition. And it provided, amongst other things, it did some good things too. The book lists some of the good things it actually did. Um, Encouraging farms to grow fruits and vegetables and encouraging farmers markets and local-based community food. But it also, the mainstay of the bill provided subsidies to corporate farming interests or agribusiness and didn't support necessarily small, local, rural best practices in progressive farming. So it really reflects kind of a long-standing underinvestment in this chronically poor rural communities. Another large kind of plague is environmental issues. So industry in general has left scarred landscapes and depleted resources, mining and forestry. And there's obviously been the huge climate shifts lately and severe weather and storms that have all impacted the land and how people are able to grow food and do the things that they do in rural economies. There's rising energy costs that's making it less and less efficient for people to be able to do things. Um, so some general common problems, rising fuel costs. It's harder for people to be able to afford to get around. Obviously, we live in a rural community here in Humboldt, and I know plenty of people who commute, over an hour every day to their job. Um, so fuel costs are definitely a factor. We don't have easily accessible, efficient public transportation here. Many rural communities are in the same boat. There's generally a need for advanced telecommunications technology. I know I had a friend who just moved into town from one of the outskirts, outlying small communities, saying that she just couldn't, she was teaching online and couldn't have the slow internet connection, which is what she was stuck with out there, or a really expensive, satellite. So that's an issue for our communities, our rural communities. Access to affordable health care, obviously. Um, Effective educational facilities and staff to run those facilities. We're talking about for kids and adults. Affordable housing is an issue in rural communities, as in urban communities, of course. And jobs that offer living wages that people are able to support their families so they don't have to move out into the metropolitan areas. So, some of the things that rural communities are doing to kind of retaliate is diversifying because they have to. So they're working on a couple of projects. One of them generally is communities are looking for ways to process their products and ship them and market them to more urban markets. For instance, if you're thinking about Humboldt, we have, Humboldt Creamery, we have different kinds of cheeses and wines and all kinds of things that we are trying to kind of ship out to different urban markets around the West Coast and make a name for ourselves for Humboldt as far as fine wines and cheeses and things like that. Maybe not just pot, right? If you have scenic landscapes, obviously that's going to equal tourism and some recreational opportunities. That's always usually a money maker. Um, there's a growing service sector in many rural communities. There's more jobs that require greater skill and education and training than they used to. And there's manufacturing. So they're quickly moving from kind of metropolitan to non-metropolitan areas. A lot of manufacturing jobs used to be centered around, for instance, in Chicago and Detroit and all these large cities, and they're actually kind of moving out into the more rural areas now as that industry changes. Many people in rural areas rely on the government for jobs. 23% of all non-metro counties depend on government employment for their economic base. Retirement communities are another source of diversification for rural communities. Baby boomers are obviously retiring in large numbers now and in the coming 5 to 10 years. And, those are jobs for young people. So young professional families come looking for jobs and really, trying to find a safe place to raise their families, which happens a lot in Humboldt County as well. Young families coming here to raise their children and raise their families in a small, tight-knit community. But the problem is the larger population base. We have more and more people flocking to rural areas. There's more pressure on the national environment. So we're talking about water supply, waste management, traffic, housing, those kind of things. And so obviously, the more people that kind of crowd into areas, we have a threat of urban sprawl. And that can threaten the kind of mainstay and base of that rural community and their traditional way that they are and they practice and the reason that brings people to them in the first place. So how can we strengthen rural communities? We need to kind of talk a little bit about how people think and how people are in rural communities and towns. Generally, people are really, really attached to their land, to their way of life, and to the survival of their small community. People that live in rural areas tend to have strong solidarity, but at the same time, kind of sometimes deep social divisions, right? So you have that, for instance, in Humboldt County, if you think about Humboldt, if you think about kind of the traditional people that maybe, have been here for generations, families that have been into farming or mining or fisheries, those kind of thing, forestry, those kind of industries that have been here for quite a while. And maybe they're a little bit more conservative, a little bit more traditional, maybe more right-wing, Christian, right? We're making generalities here, but and then you have, the kind of progressive, more leftist, younger, generally, kind of more hippie type of people that reside here because of the kind of free-thinking area that it is. And maybe they grow pot or they smoke pot, right? And then we also have the indigenous people who, were on this land originally, and all the reservations and the tribes that existed here for, since time immemorial. So it's diverse. There's other groups of populations of people here as well. So we have, we can all say, Humboldt's our home and we're all proud to be Humboldt, but we have all these different kind of divisions in our population as well. So there's a solidarity, obviously. Generally in rural communities, it's kind of a tight-knit, homogeneous community, and a lot of times people will share common history and values. But there's also, as I said before, sometimes deep ethnic roots, like Native American tribes, reservations, and a lot of times some different ethnic populations, like Latino population, or here in Humboldt County we have a strong Hmong population. So there can be deep economic and social divisions in rural communities. There's kind of, sometimes there's this fear of difference, right? To live in a rural community oftentimes demands conformity, right? As much as we hate to say, it's true. The way that we live here in Humboldt demands a certain kind of way of being. And this solidarity and unity can be really supportive to people, and it can also result in, prejudice, kind of intolerant attitudes. Um, I have a personal example of this. My mom came to visit me a couple of times. She's been up here a couple of times, and she's from Pittsburgh. Obviously, I'm from Pittsburgh, and she walks around here, and she's just kind of people watching and very interested in everybody here, and the difference of, you know, diversity of population here in Humboldt, and um, and I always say, Mom, you should come, you should come move out here and live out here, and she says, I couldn't do it. I just don't feel like I fit in there. I just walk around and I feel different. Um, it's true. Sometimes, you have to fit a certain kind of mold to be in Humboldt and to fit in. So, another division is that sometimes people can be resistant to change. So that idea of that really close-knit solidarity community, that can kind of block change or limit people's choices. So people don't want to risk reducing that solidarity and exposing those internal divisions. So people sometimes say, well, it's just easier to avoid an issue and to avoid argument and confrontation rather than risk that solidarity that helps build the unity. So how can we develop solutions? Rural social workers need to address and assist new arrivals who bring different cultural attitudes, different political views. Social workers need to make sure that all of the segments of the population are feeling included in what's going on in the community. Social workers are good at linking related businesses that have ties to each other in different ways, and how can we network and build solutions together. A lot of times rural social workers will create projects, community projects, and it becomes kind of a community effort, whether that's an arts, maybe Arts Alive like we have here in Arcata and Eureka, um, cultural, different cultural venues and events for people to go to, heritage programs, um, developing networks. So small businesses and firms become more economically viable when they can operate together. Again, kind of the idea of linking related businesses and building networks for the business community. So when we're talking about policy, of course, as social workers, we always say one size does not fit all, right? It never captures that whole diversity of rural America, and it's true here in Humboldt as well. So as social workers, when we're talking about policy, we want to help members or our constituency kind of sculpt those policies and programs that specifically meet local needs and address local issues. And the solutions have to work with the natural environment because it's such a huge part of rural communities. And we also have to attract new economic opportunities, right? We're always looking for those new economic streams of funding to inject into our communities. And some of the key points here that the book points out that are helpful for when we're talking about policy in rural communities is educational outreach programs, affordable health care, and improved transportation systems, all strengthening our rural communities. So there's some federal initiatives that are actually listed in the book if you want to know more about exactly what each one of them does. But they're basically incentive programs to kind of help stimulate businesses and encourage entrepreneurship in rural and small communities. One of the examples here is the Homestead Act, which is kind of an incentive program for people who are commit to living and working in rural regions that traditionally have declining populations. And there's some other ones listed here that either link businesses together to kind of help them develop. Maybe they provide grants to community development corporations, which we'll talk about in a couple of weeks. Or they inject money somehow in, they support, businesses that would support other businesses. So it's all about kind of supporting and linking resources in small communities, because that's really how we can guarantee the effectiveness and the health of the community. So I think that's all I have. Oh, I do have more. Oh, that's good. Let's see if I can go back. So that's the end of the textbook part of the lecture, but I wanted to actually go over this part a little bit. This is from one of our readings. And the reading is Opportunities and Considerations for Rural Progressive Organizing, and it's by Gary Sandusky. And he talks a little bit about, he's been an organizer for over 30 years and in the rural communities in the Northwest specifically. And he talks about some of the successes he's had in rural community organizing and kind of how to gain those successes. And so he says some of the key points are making sure you're crossing constituency boundaries. So we're realizing that not one part of that community is going to have all the resources needed to kind of leverage those issues. So we can't just put all of our eggs in one basket, so to speak. We obviously have the challenge of distance. We have community members who are scattered throughout the mountains and the hills and the forests all through the community. And so utilizing technology, phone, internet, Skyping, those kind of things, social media. We always have to remember to recognize and respect cultural differences. There's actually a lot more cultural diversity in rural communities than most people think. And most people obviously are not going to buy into the organizing process unless they see a leader they can trust, or a leader that reflects their culture and at least understands and respects their culture. We want to make sure we're respecting and overcoming language barriers. He talks about this idea of respectful accommodation, which I really like. He's taking it from the idea of reasonable accommodation, which is for people with disabilities. Businesses have to create a ramp that are wheelchair accessible for people with disabilities. And he talks about the idea of more of a respectful accommodation, that it's just respectful to have those things, right? And it's just respectful to have planning for translation services. It's respectful to be able to, go to a rally and have someone translating, or to have paperwork that's in different languages for people. He talks a little bit about reservations and tribes, and he talks about how progressive organizing really looks different when we're talking about Native people. And I really liked this quote here that he says, if you don't understand tribal sovereignty, you can't understand organizing in Indian country. Our task is different. We are engaged in nation building, and that is a different task than most progressive organizing understands. So this was a member of the Sioux tribe that that quote comes from. And it's really true. I mean, unless we understand how our policies in the dominant culture, or traditional, policy solutions would either support or hinder the idea of tribal sovereignty, then we're not going to be able to effectively organize an Indian country. So the policy solutions there really have to be developed with the tribal interests in mind and with the help of the tribes, and to kind of working together in collaboration with tribes. And when we're organizing around here, specifically in the northwest area of this country, we cannot separate that from work with Native people. As we cannot separate rural and community work, we cannot separate rural progressive organizing with Native issues, because that's one and the same. They're intertwined. And so if you're ever finding yourself running a campaign, or um, working on a social movement in a rural community, I hope that you're reaching out to the Native American tribe that are there, or the reservations that exist there on that land. We also have Latino populations here in Humboldt and in many, many rural communities across the country. And Sandusky actually, has a little example there in his reading about, a town that's, I think he was a ski town in rural Colorado, um, and they had recruited a huge population of Latino people to come work in their town without really thinking about what that would mean for those people, for the community building, those kind of things. And so, be wary of recruiting large amounts of any kind of population without considering kind of community development issues and infrastructure for those people, because the result he talked about was many of the local people kind of blaming that population, the Latino people, for the problems that came about from that, instead of, the people that kind of aggressively recruited those peoples to come there. And so it was kind of ended up to be a blaming the victim sort of situation. Make sure you remember how you can accommodate language differences, cultural differences, and new leadership opportunities for people, specifically people of color and people that were historically marginalized, that were maybe left out of those leadership opportunities before. Um, and we're talking about being respectful, right? Which everyone knows, obviously, we're going to be respectful, but what exactly does that mean? Being respectful means maybe restructuring meetings or completely retooling your meetings to be more inclusive of other people and other populations. Being aware and thoughtful of the atmosphere of your organization. What is the accessibility of your organization? How friendly are you to the local minority population communities, to people that have been historically disenfranchised, right? And provide clear pathways to leadership for those people specifically. Now I'm done. Okay. So I hope I didn't bore you again. And I am really excited about this class. I'm so excited that all of you are so engaged and so eager to learn. Um, and I hope that we can continue to learn together, and that you'll let me know if there's anything that I can do to assist you in that process, and anything specific that you would like from me that I can help you with. So keep in touch, and thank you again for everything. And have a great week.